Hi, and welcome back to Comic Industry Insiders, the weekly comics podcast where we get to know the operators of the comic book industry and kind of learn their stories and try and tease out the tools that you can use in your own career. Our guest this week is Julia Walchuk. Julia is one of the gentlest badasses I know in comics. I've had the honor of working with Julia, and I can tell you that she was a dynamo and passionate about making us a better company as part of that team. She's since moved on, become a big deal over at Viz Entertainment, where she started off in the sales department, is now an editor. And our conversation, it just went all over the place, from turning her passions into a career. Oh, we had a bit of a talk about the social engineering of the Comics Code Authority and how it ruined Batman. Networking and relationship building and how those skills carry you through every step of your life and your career. And we even talked a minute or two about how to encourage new ideas when you're actually old and jaded like me. So I always like talking to Julia. This was no different. I'm so glad that you get to watch this. So now, Julia Walchuk. Julia is one of the gentlest badasses I know in comics. I had the honor to work with Julia at Valiant Entertainment when we hired her to the sales department in 2017. During the year or so we worked together, I found her to be creative and passionate in pushing us all to grow as a company. Since then, she's moved on to become a force to be reckoned with as the publishing sales manager and now editor at Viz Entertainment during a time when manga sales are exploding. Julia made the short list of people our team wanted to launch this project with because of her experience in gaming, Western comics, and now manga. I was thrilled to do it because I'm such a fan. So, Julia, you were my direct report at Valiant. Would you like to use this opportunity to tell the world just what a shitty boss I actually was? Because this is the opportunity, right? I mean, we have literally an audience of dozens that are going to hear, and you can finally tell me what it is that you were looking to get off of your chest.
I will plead the fifth on that.
I knew it.
It was quite a time in my career. I was a little newbie. We both learned a lot, I think. And both came out better for it, I think.
I think so too. I know that there's actually one instance that keeps coming up in my life, in my career, that we're going to talk about a little later when we get to that portion of your career. Where I keep going back to a memory of a conversation with you that I keep trying to get right. And anyway, I'm going to leave that as a little teaser for later. So let's just start with where you're from. You're from, I mean, all I know really is that you graduated at the University of Minnesota with a BA in Communications. Look at that.
I did, yes.
And you founded the Girls Only Comic Club. Look at that.
Did, yes.
Well, comics
actually, no.
deep in there.
I co-founded the Girls Only Comic Club. I founded the Minneapolis Comic Book Club. Big distinction.
I'm so sorry. Yes. Our researchers will be duly reprimanded for this. But yes.
Yeah, I'm from a small town in southern Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Called Mankato. And it's I think it's technically become a mini metropolis now. And so it wasn't like a farm town, but it definitely wasn't a city, right in the middle there. And then I moved up to Minneapolis for college and stayed there for 2 years after college.
And it was there that you got your first job in kind of comics retail or like gaming retail, right?
Yep. I started at Dreamer's Vault, and that was both a comics and gaming store. And they had multiple locations, so I started at the St. Louis Park location, which already had comics, but then they moved me to the Minneapolis location, and part of my job was to bring in comics to that location as well.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you were already a comics fan. I mean, you were starting up. Like, what was kind of stuff, what were you reading back then?
So I used to be really into Batman. Like, very into Batman. I wrote my thesis on it for undergrad.
You wrote your thesis on it. What was the what were you expounding on?
So I was writing about the comics code and how it changed the modern day perception of comics. And it was a literary analysis of pre-code comics and comparing them to comics under the code and how the tone changed, the intent changed, the audience changed. And the general thesis was that the code led to a dumbing down of comics and led it to be seen as a children's thing and not something that's available for everybody because the restrictions within the code basically left no room for it to be anything other than children's comics. And so I had, oh, it was so cool. My college had like this vault of Batman comics, and I got to like bring them up and read them with little gloves and like take notes and stuff. And
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it was
That's
amazing,
awesome.
and it was so fun to write. And I ended up accidentally finding, so I had like the original Batman origin story from pre-code, but then I ended up getting a wrong comic that I didn't ask for, but in it was a new origin story for Batman that was like slightly changed to fit the code, and it was fascinating, and I loved it so much.
Was it? Was it that Thomas and Martha come out of Zorro and get like hit? Like, what was it? Was it different?
So, yes, but
Okay.
so in the original, they both get shot. In
Yeah.
the new one, Thomas gets shot, and then Martha can't bear a life without her husband, so she dies of a broken heart. Because most of the
Okay.
code was just a front for getting women back into the households after they started working during the war.
Oh man.
So, anyway, so then also Bruce in the original, he cries. And in the code approved version, there's a very hitting you over the head with the fact that he's a man, so he can't cry. And he's sad that his parents are dead, but he couldn't let himself cry. So, yeah, fascinating.
So the code had the toxic masculinity clause in there. That's
Oh my God.
what?
It was so,
Really?
it was all about, like, all the rules were like, the roles in the household need to be reflected in the comics, and everyone needs to be working within their role, and women need to be gentle, and men need to be strong, and all this type of stuff.
And all of it written basically to get rid of Bill Gaines, who was just making too much money over at EC, and so
Yeah.
the guys at DC and Marvel had to save their sales. That is fascinating. I have never heard that. I was a Batman fan. And I still, to this day, I still sample. Batman's probably the only superhero that I sample on a regular basis. I don't read on a regular Batman comics anymore, but yeah, I had never heard that. That's incredible. Thank you. Well, that's really cool. All right.
It was a very fun project. And then actually during that time, so I grew up reading because my brothers read comics, but I basically just had whatever they got at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
So like Bone was a big one, and then we had like the first 100 X-Men in like a big thing, and like
Sure.
the first 100 Iron Man. But I started reading Saga during that time in college, and then I just started going to the library and getting anything I found on the shelves that looked remotely interesting and just devouring it. So like Lock and Key, Preacher, gosh, so many just random things during that time.
Was there anything during that period? Because speaking of Batman, for me it was Dark Knight Returns. The moment you read something, you're like, "Oh, I'm going to take this seriously now," right? There's this it goes from being an entertainment to something that is going to be, I don't know, identity is probably too strong a word, but you make that choice. I think I remember it being a choice.
I think honestly it started way earlier for me, even though I didn't have access to a lot and I didn't know what to look for. I think Bone really shaped that perspective for me. I know it's in theory a kid's comic, but man, is that a good comic. And my brothers, they used to read these books called the Flight anthologies, which were like small short stories by different creators and artists, and the art was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Remember these,
I just
yeah.
remember being like, this is art. Like, this is amazing. And so a lot of that influenced me growing up. And then, I don't know, when I got to college, it was still kind of, I didn't know what I was doing. It was a pipe dream. Like it didn't even occur to me that working in comics was a thing that could happen. So I did communications as a major, as a catch-all, because I didn't know what I was doing. And then when I started doing the comic book clubs, and I met someone named Katie Rex who was writing reviews about comics, and I was like, oh, you can actually do things in comics as like a profession. So that's what kind of opened those doors for me.
Awesome. That's amazing. Katie Rex. I feel like I have met Katie.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know who you're talking about. All right, so you finish, you write your thesis, you finish college, you move to New York City, right? Is that how that worked, or did you just dive out? What brought you to this this hellhole of ours?
So I stayed in Minneapolis for 2 years, and I was happy, but I just was restless. And since I was in fourth grade, I knew I wanted to move to New York. It was just a dream I had, and I tend to make kind of big decisions on what seems like a whim to everyone else, but is actually something that's been festering in my mind for years and years and years. So one day I was just like, you know what? It's time. I'm moving to New York. I have a lot of savings from working. I worked all through college at various like Chipotle, Starbucks, things like that. So I had a bunch of savings. And I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. I want to work in comics publishing. I know some of it's in New York, some of it's in California, but I'm not ready for California yet, so New York it is. And I just moved. I had a sublet set up for 3 months. I had one job interview that actually responded, not with a job, but just an interview once I got there. And I went.
Where was that interview?
It was at a game store called 20-Sided Store in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And they were impressed by my knowledge of Magic the Gathering. So, yes.
See, Mom? It did work out. I did.
It did.
I spent all your money and all of my time learning this stupid game, and it did. I did get a job, Mom.
Hey, I spent none of my parents' money. That was all me.
Excuse me. I'm so sorry. So let's talk about, before we leave that period, let's talk about Dreamer's Vault and then 20-Sided Die, or 20-Sided Store, excuse me. So talk about those experiences, like, because, I mean, jumping ahead, our work involved working with retailers, working with fans at the shows. How did those experiences, like, kind of set you up for that? What did you learn from those periods? Were there any, big aha moments, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I loved working at those stores. I think the biggest thing for me is the community that gets built around these kind of hobbies that we have. So, I would have regulars. I would work like a 10-hour shift in the Streamers by myself. It used to be a Blockbuster, so just put that into your mind. And I was there for 10 hours behind the counter by myself. And I would have regulars who would come up and we'd play Magic across the counter when it got really slow. We'd talk about what they were reading. I'd help them find a book for, their niece, their nephew. Even if they weren't comics readers, the gamers would come and look for books for people they knew. And it was just such a community and such a place for people who maybe didn't have a place somewhere else that they felt really welcomed into. And that was like kind of what really touched me, because it's hard, like, finding your people in this world, and to have a space that's open to so many people and, like, all types of people getting along together because they're interested in the same hobby, especially with the gaming. Like, our Yu-Gi-Oh players in the same room as our Warhammer players, like, coexisting together. Who knew? It's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, in many ways, I've dedicated my professional life to comic shops, and I think it's really because of that. Like, it's in various times of my life, I needed a third place, right? And we talk about that now. That wasn't work or home or when I grew up church. Like, it wasn't that. It was a place where for people like me, like people like us, right? That's where we gather. Yeah, I agree. Well, that's excellent. So he comes to New York. I just legitimately, as we're talking about this, I'm having a memory about how we got your name. So at this point, I am, I don't remember what my title was, but I'm running the sales department at Valiant. And we got your name. Oh, I can't remember her name.
Lisa?
Oh, shoot. Huh?
Was it Lisa?
It was Lisa. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we were talking to Lisa about a job, and because that's what we do in publishing is we poach from retailers and ruin their lives by taking their best people. And I think she said, no, I don't think I'm going to do this. But have you met my friend Julia? So yeah, so at this point, were you still inside of your 3 months, or you were like you were making your way in the big city off of your Magic the Gathering specialist?
I was making my way in the big city at this point. I actually only lasted a month and a half in that first apartment because I was allergic to it. I'm
You're not good with rat droppings and black mold? No? You can't handle that?
Do you know what diatomaceous earth is?
Yes, I know what I live in Brooklyn. Of course I know what diatomaceous earth is. I've got a bag of it underneath my sink right now. Yes.
So it kills bed bugs, right?
Yes,
so
it does.
The building I was in had bed bugs in an apartment 3 floors up from mine. And my roommate was incredibly paranoid, understandably so. She dumped diatomaceous earth all over our entire apartment, everywhere. There were wood floorboards that had cracks, and it just settled into the cracks. Now, it also kills dust mites. And when you're allergic to dust mites, you're allergic to their dead bodies as well as their everything else. So, I, being allergic to dust mites, was just attacked by dust mite particles 24/7. And my eyes literally got so swollen that they started cracked and bleeding. And so I moved out of that apartment.
Oh!
Yeah.
Here's kids. Stay in the Midwest. Just stay. It's okay. You're gonna find a life there. It'll get better.
But then, that was in Queens. I moved to Brooklyn. I loved Brooklyn. It was great.
Yeah.
So then
I do have to say, having lived in New York now for about 12 years and in Brooklyn for most of it, it's just I can't imagine living anywhere else. I have imagined on a regular basis, but I can't seem to find where the other place is. Right?
Yeah, Brooklyn's the best. But actually, how I remember the Valiant job is slightly similar but slightly different. I went to Forbidden Planet one day, and Matthew was there, Matthew Klein.
Yes.
And I ran into him, and I was like, hey, what's up? Like, I met you at cons, because part of how I got into the industry was just taking myself to cons on my own dime and networking as much as I possibly could. Trying to meet people. Lisa was a huge help, introduced me to people, just go bug people at their booths. So people knew who I was, and when something like this happened, they would know my name and know who I was. And so I ran into him at Forbidden Planet, and he was like, oh, we're hiring, actually. And I was like, oh. So I was aware of it from that, and then I talked to Lisa about it, and then it all came together like that.
Yeah, it's really funny is the reason that we hired Matthew was I heard about this guy named Matthew Rosenberg, who was working at Forbidden Planet and was a great salesman. And so I said, hey, do you want to join our team? And he's like, no, I think I'm going to become a writer. And I'm like, okay, sure. And of course, he's now a crazy big writer. But he said, but have you met Matthew Klein? So there you go. You came in through two different doors. Yeah. And Matthew
Rosenberg wrote me a letter of recommendation. I can't remember if it was for Valiant or for somewhere else, but he did. So that's all connected.
Matthew, if you're hearing this, we'd love to have you on the show, man. What a guy! That guy, he got it dialed in. He really understood how the connection between retailers and creators should work. I think
absolutely. And he was so incredible. Nice to this little girl who just wanted to be in comics and was doing everything she could.
He's a sweetheart. Absolutely. Yeah. Also, if you ever just give him some chocolate milk and he'll be happy. It's his weak spot. So okay, so tell me about that experience. Like, so from your let's pretend I wasn't there, or pretend I was. I don't care. Tell me about the Valiant experience from your perspective, because you and I overlapped for about as I want to say it was like a year and a half, something like that. I got everything I said in the intro was absolutely true. I remember that time well, and I remember you being a bright spot of my end there. So,
Thank you.
Partially why I was looking so forward to this interview. So, you're coming out of retail, you're stepping into publishing. Is a career you're still into. How has that experience shaped what you do there? And keep in mind that all the people that we worked with there are pretty much gone, so you can say anything you want.
Yeah, so it was terrifying, fascinating, a lot of things all at once. I started as part-time, basically cold calling retailers, which I was so scared of because I was still am sometimes very shy. And so getting on that phone, calling the retailers. But I will say that my experience as a retailer really helped me get into this job because I remember, being in the store, getting this kind of call. I remembered how much fun it was when the Valiant reps would come by the store and talk to us and everything. So it was hard. It was scary. I got a very mean email very early on that haunts me to this day. But
feel free to say his name on the show or tell me about it later.
Brian, I love you now, but you scared me.
Did you get a Hibbs email?
Yeah.
Oh, of course
I did.
Of course.
Honestly, he taught me a lot in that email. I did learn some things. I learned both technical things about computers because I did not know that some email services cannot receive large files. This is something I didn't know. And I also learned how to take feedback, process it, and not take it personally. And I think that's a big, big thing I learned at Valiant was how to interpret feedback in a way that wasn't personal, both from management at Valiant, retailers, all across the board. Everyone who's in this job loves comics, and that comes across in passion in different ways. And sometimes that can be scary. Sometimes it can be tough to deal with. But if you think about the root of it, that all of this is coming from a place of love, it's a lot easier to handle.
Amen. Yeah. And I think that's something that we all need to keep in mind is, as much as it's so easy to other sections of the industry, there's nobody here, with maybe I can think of 3 or 4 exceptions I've met in my career, but aside from them, everyone who is here for passion. We're all here because we love comics and we love the people who love comics, right? Yeah. So amen.
Yeah.
Well, I can share with you one of my biggest lessons came out of that period. I teased this earlier. Was how to handle there's a particular tool that as marketers that we sometimes want to use, and it is so difficult to get right. And it is this idea of using the product that you're selling, using an attribute of the product that you're selling that nobody's read yet, right? Some piece of the story that you're selling to sell the story. And it comes up, like it is like I did it, my first job in publishing. Everybody I have ever met has done this the first time they get a job in publishing is they say, well, here in this story, there's a red balloon. We should send everyone red balloons. And then they're going to want to, when they see it in the story, they're going to go, oh, red balloons. And then they're going to tell people about it. And the problem is that it never, not that it never works. There's been as many times as it has worked. But the problem is just how do you do that in a way that actually affects sales when you need to affect sales? So anyway, all of that the whole thing, that whole little TED Talk was an effort to say we were trying to break a marketing plan, and I don't remember what it was for. Let's say it was Archer and Armstrong, and you said, why don't we? Again, I'm not going to pull an example out of the air. Why don't we just give everybody a bag of holding or something like that? Which is, I think that's what they call the thing that Armstrong carries. Okay, good. Thank God. So, and I think at the time I gave you my little TED Talk. Right? It's so hard to make that work. I'm not, and I think in that I said, I don't. It's not that it can't work. It's just that it does. I haven't seen it work. Right? And you were just so crestfallen, and like I think you were kind of angry that I just like shot it down, and you were, it was understandable, right? But and I've obviously it has stuck with me ever since, and I've run across this like it happens with a team member on my current team. Like it happened where I said, we're trying to break this thing, and she came up with an idea just like that. And like I said, I started from a place like that. I have still never gotten it right, but how, as a leader, as a manager, how you have that conversation that doesn't tamp down creativity while, voicing what the challenges are with the idea on the table, it's a tough one, man. It's an advanced move. It's really, yeah. So anyway, obviously I think about this still. So.
I think I remember exactly what that was, what push that was. I think it was for Bloodshot. But anyway.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that too, and I have brought that into other jobs because I was so frustrated because I was like, well, what's the point of me being here if none of my ideas, if they've all been done before and none of them work? And it seems like there's a right answer. This was my problem. I was like, it seems like there's a right answer, and I'm not approaching that right answer. I'm getting the wrong answer. But I have no idea what the right answer is, and I don't feel like I have the tools to know what the right answer is. And so I didn't to me it felt like you were looking for something specific. And what I didn't understand was that you worked. It's just that it had to be outside of what you had tried already. And I think there isn't an easy way to have this conversation. I'd had this conversation at Viz too, because when the longer you're at a company, the longer you're in an industry, these things become very clear to you, and you can get, I don't want to say jaded, because I don't think you were necessarily jaded. It's just you get a mindset of this does not work, so let's not even bother. And it's really hard as a new person because you're like, but why wouldn't it work? And why are my ideas not hitting? And what is even going to hit? Like, how am I supposed to know that coming into this blind, So I think it's a hard conversation to have.
It is. It's a really tough one. And especially, I mean, I don't think that I don't know that it is common knowledge how difficult the creative process of marketing can be, right? Mm-hmm. You really just have to, kind of stare at your shoes for, a long time in order to get to a place where you're coming up with an idea that sounds fresh to anyone, right? Yeah. Much less the old guy in the room who has, seen it all. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. And I will tell you now, I default now to, all right, well, let's explore that, right? Because maybe the answer now is not, well, that didn't work this other time we tried it. Maybe the answer is, well, if we spend some time exploring that before I go, well, we did try that, then maybe we'll find something new. And that's really what you're looking for, right? It's not the right answer. It's something new. But,
and I think that exploration is important, too, because then it doesn't take the idea immediately off the table. And so it gives the new person a chance to be like, okay, we're looking into this. And maybe they'll find the pitfalls themselves. And that's a rewarding thing, too. Like, I've had that happen.
That's true.
Yeah,
and I will say I've also had that backfire on me too. I've had somebody I've essentially said, yeah, you go run that down, and then they spend the next 6 months, and you're like, I wanted you to figure out that it wasn't going to work, and it hasn't worked. You know, it's a tough one. But it's funny that you know, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I'm realizing that there's been an experience for me in the not too distant past where I did feel the same way, where I was working with somebody and it was like it feels like you want an answer here and I'm not finding that answer, so maybe I'm just going to quit. You know, and that quit trying to give you answers. And that's, you know, that's not what you want either, right? On either side of that equation. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, I'm glad we had this. This is great. This is like therapy. This is great. I can't believe I didn't do this before. So what do you think? What are the highlights? I mean, what are the big moments that you're proud of? Like, what ideas did you get through? Like, what do you, when you look back on your experience at Valiant, what were those big achievements?
A huge highlight for me was the work I did in the event space. So after working initially as a sales manager, I also became the events manager, and that was so rewarding for me. I loved going to the shows. I loved trying out new booth setups. Like, I did this thing that's so simple, and I don't know if I would even do it again. I haven't put enough thought into it to know, but I wanted to have a table with chairs so people could come and sit and talk to the people who worked at the booth without having to stand and like be across the tables. And so we had a little table and people came and sat, and I loved getting to be able to do that experiment. And I did it in multiple different iterations, and then I eventually scrapped it, and that's okay. And I really enjoyed just like having the chance to try stuff out in that way.
Well, why'd you scrap it? Because I will tell you, like, I've been in the room where this idea has been pitched, and there's always the same objection comes up every time. So I'm curious to know whether or not that was your experience. So I'm not going to tell you what it was.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different things I think that can happen with that. One, it becomes a place where people put their stuff, and then the stuff just sits there, which did happen. And two, it becomes a place where people loiter, which, yes, but is not necessarily a bad thing because there's so many few places of solace in a convention center. If you can be that place of solace, it's not necessarily a bad thing, always. That's my take on it. But ultimately, I just ended up being in the way, and when I did the New York Comic Con booth, we just didn't have room for it. And then I never felt the need to bring it back in. So that was an answer enough for me, was that I didn't miss it when it was gone.
There you go. I like that. Yeah, that's good enough. That's a good enough reason to never do it again. Yeah. Well, and so here's the question then, to go back to our earlier conversation. You're at a in a meeting, right? And some young, vibrant, go-getter says, we should give people lazy boys where they can come and sit. Right? Or, chairs at the table, whatever. How do you respond to that? Like in that, like, now that you're a senior, now that you have these many years under your belt and you've tried it, what do you say?
I think I would start by just having them give me write down a list of all the potential things that could happen with those chairs at a convention. Like, what could happen, both good and bad, with those chairs, and start from there. I think that's a good talking point of there's a lot of stuff that goes on that we don't even think about in the moment, and we have to make ourselves think of the pros and cons. Not necessarily pros and cons list, but similar. You have to go through every possibility because it will happen. Anything you think won't happen will happen. So
sure.
Just like
that
being
many people.
Being as absurd as you can, put everything on the table of what could happen, and then relook at it after you do that exercise.
Oh, that's really good. I'm stealing that. I'm writing that down. Oh, that is good. All right, good. I'm going to write down be absurd, but I also have a recording I can refer back to.
Yes, be absurd.
Yes, be absurd. Just write it all down. That is so good.
Yeah.
All right. All right, cool. All right, so and so then I left Valiant, and all of it went to shit, right? The whole thing just degraded. I mean, actually, that's not true, because you ran the shows after I left, so everything you said was just your favorite was after I left. I was obviously holding you down. Yeah.
There were good and bad parts after you left. I really loved running the shows, and that was like a big highlight in my career. And then it became, there's a lot of head butting internally that was not conducive to me wanting to continue to grow and learn.
Yeah.
So that was difficult to deal with.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And, I wasn't there anymore. So I can say I do miss running a booth like that. It's so physical, and it's like running retail where you're daily you get like this feedback on what it is you're doing in this form of dollars, and yeah, it's just, and you get to work with people. There's lots of people and crowds and lots of different people. I don't know. I do miss that part. Yeah. All right, so you did so well there that Viz Media comes knocking on your door and says, move away from there. Said California is the place you ought to be. That was a reference to the Beverly Hillbillies, which most people I don't even remember. Yes. Yeah.
I sort of know that.
Youngsters. Yes. Anyway. So you get a job doing basically, essentially, what was it was publishing sales manager, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And were you essentially, was it just those skills that you had learned at Valiant, the tasks that you had, just moving to a part of publishing that actually sold units? Was your experience?
Yeah, yes and no. It was a lot more different than I expected. I thought it would translate a little more one-to-one, but it was a lot more macro view than micro view at Viz. So Valiant was very individual stores, individual retailers, what can we do, on the ground. And Viz was looking at a big picture. How can we make this better for all retailers? How can we work programs that benefit every retailer and so none get left behind in the shuffle? A very different viewpoint, but equally as rewarding and cool. I also learned a lot of Excel when I went to Viz. So I am a whiz at Excel now, in case you need my services.
I just might.
So a lot of data tracking, looking at, what was working, what wasn't working, making sure we stayed on top of all those trends and what was happening. And initially when I was at Viz, I was kind of all sales, doing a lot of different things. But we had a little bit of a reshuffling when one of our employees went to a different company, and then I ended up in charge of the comic book market and the library market because those were ones I had a lot of experience with and knew well. So that was great, and continuing to get to do conferences like Comics Pro and things like that, and being able to have that one-on-one time retailers while also looking at this bigger picture was very cool.
Right. All right, so if you don't mind, I, too, have spent way more hours than probably a grown man should looking at sales data in Excel and trying to tease out things. So, tell me, I don't know, this is one of those bits we might just cut out because it'll bore everyone, but I'm interested. So what sort of data were you working with? Like, were you working with account data, like specifically like sales data on specific items from specific accounts? Were you just dealing with 10,000 feet overviews? What sort of stuff were you working with, and what was what were you trying to tease out of it?
Yeah, so I'm going to say yes, because we did a lot of all of that. So we had a monthly dashboard that kind of ran down where books were selling best, what was selling best at different stores, not just in the US too. We would look at internationally as well. We were looking at what imprints were selling well in what different areas. And then we had another data set where we would look at how things were selling in regards to how the anime was doing, in regards to any announcements that were coming out. And we would have a graph with book scan data, and then we would put like a little arrow that says, on this day, it was announced that this anime would be coming out. And then it would be like, on this day, this anime came out. And it would be tracking all of that and watching the trends. We would also track different sales we did at different places. So, like, if we had a Books a Million sale for the holidays, how that affected the way the numbers were looking and changing. And we would do it for all titles. We would do it for specific titles. We would do it for kind of our heavy hitters and looking at how those were selling, and especially the heavy hitters that had recent anime releases. We had a special deck for that. We would look at age groups and how different like age ratings. So we have like all ages, teen, T+, mature, all those, like how that would affect how things were selling. Yeah, a lot of different things across the board.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There is a very specifically nerdy part of me that's like, how do I sign the NDA so I can see what you guys were doing? I just want to see what you guys were doing. Yeah.
I wish I could show you, just because I am a nerd and was very proud of the way they were formatted and the way they turned out. So,
right?
Yeah.
There's a certain pride and work there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think one of the pieces I like to highlight here is there's a common seeming belief in the retail side of comics that, you know, that retailers can basically say anything and that the publishers won't know one way or the other. And it's been my experience that the publishers always know. You know, you can say one thing and then order a different thing, and we're going to default to what you ordered, not what you said, right? And it's always a surprise, I think, to retailers when they find out that we have the receipts. Of course, we keep them, you know. So that is fascinating to me, and I could spend the next hour just talking about that. But we will not torture our people with that. So let's talk a little bit before we move on to the next phase in your career where you took on one of the shittiest jobs in comics. Let's talk about comic shops, U.S. comic shops, right?
Yeah.
It's been obviously a passion for me my entire life. You and I have talked about that quite a bit. You were there. You're selling manga. Manga is selling, you know, anywhere that's actually selling it, right? It is just showing up. And yet, so many American comic shops either refuse to try manga or try it and fail, or, you know, they don't know how to connect with it. I know that I, as a retailer, had a hard time. Once I found the books that I loved, it was like, oh, I could sell that all day, you know? But, you know, I think it's also a bandwidth issue. Like, I'm having a hard enough time keeping up with the Western comics. How am I going to keep up with an entire library, you know, an entire backlist that goes back decades? So talk to me about the successes that you saw. Talk to me about some of the failures. Like, where did you see that growth? And I'm sure it must have been a struggle because you and I have such an affinity for those places that can't seem to figure out what seems to be an obvious thing, right?
Yeah, this was a big part of my time in sales. And actually, it changed as I was in sales, which was fascinating to see, too. The first year I was doing it, my conversations were, you know, this is manga. I know you know what manga is, but let's go more in depth. Why are kids connecting to this? Why is this selling right now? What is it about the anime that's making the manga sell? Let's just do an overview of different genres of manga and how you can stock based on genre to fit your store. It was very beginner level. Let's get all on board with this medium. Let's talk about it as a medium and not a genre, because it's not a genre. And kind of having those conversations so that retailers who were nervous about it, who, you know, look at a backwards book and are just not ready to have those conversations with customers, feel a little more comfortable with the medium in general. And so that's how it started. And I love those conversations because I love manga. And so it was really cool to have those conversations. But by the last retailer summit, the Diamond Retailer Summit that I was at, the conversations were completely different. The conversations were why is your manga out of stock? How can I get more of this one? Which one should I be looking out for next? When is this anime coming out? It was amazing to see because I just felt like the retailers were listening. You know, obviously the numbers spoke for themselves. You could not deny the sales figures at that point. But it was just really heartening to see that kind of change in attitude and to go from, no, this just won't sell in my store to how can I get this to sell in my store? It was awesome.
Excellent. Well, so you slayed that dragon and you decided to move on. That is awesome. What can you say? Is there anything that you can say to a shop that has, tried it and failed and feels like the world has moved on? Like, is there something? What is your big, your big pieces of advice? Could just be one bullet. I'm sure there's probably a couple in your quiver. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah, I have to succinct this because I have so many, but one of them is try to fit the manga that you choose to your audience. If you have kids come in a lot, get Pokemon, get Zelda. Those things are amazing for kids. They love them. They will read any volume. You don't have to have the first one. You can just put any of those volumes on your shelf, and if you say, hey, look at this Pokemon that's in here, they'll be excited about it. And it's great for gift giving because the parents do not know what they're talking. Not always. Some parents know what they're talking about. But often you'll have a parent who does not know what they're talking about, and you say, oh, your kid is into Pokemon? Here's manga that is exactly perfect for that. If you have Yu-Gi-Oh players, get some of the shonen stuff like My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, that kind of action-y, fun stuff. If your crowd skews very literary, if they're into, a lot of the more indie Western comics, do something like Junji Ito, Uzumaki, the kind of more art house manga, as it were. Those are going to work really well for your hardcore Western comics fans. So just making sure you talk to your audience. And then the other thing is, while a lot of these series are huge, there are a lot that are smaller. So ask your representatives at Viz or again, whatever company it is, if you're looking for something that's shorter to fit on your shelf, we will have suggestions for that. And there are some really good series that are short, sweet, to the point.
It is a wonderful problem to have, and I think it also reflects something in the Western comics too, is that now the comics shop's job is as much about curating, what is on their shelves as it is anything else. Like I've been at this long enough that I remember being in a shop where we proudly said that we had every trade paperback in print all the time. I mean, can you imagine how big that warehouse would have to be now? That's that would be impossible. I mean, it's not impossible. I'm sure that there are plenty of bigger warehouses that handle that, but still, not in a shop, not in 2,000 square feet. But yeah, I mean, now the problem is, what sort of store do I have based on the stuff that's on the shelves? That's really great advice, especially working with somebody when you have people who are working sales that really want you to succeed, reaching out and helping to figure that out. Okay,
and I will say the guy. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
But the guy who has what I was on the sales team, the publishing sales manager with the retailers in mind, John, is amazing. So nice. He will give you so much help if you ask. So
what's John's name?
John. Oh God, I'm going to say his last name wrong. John Despacito. Let me make sure. I'll email you. We'll get it right.
Isn't that a song, Despacito?
Yes, and that's why I know I'm saying it wrong, but that's how I read it in my head. So I'll get you his actual name.
All right. Make sure you get his email too. We'll put it in the show notes in case anybody wants to reach out and talk to John Despacito.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Were you dancing to that song when you broke your leg?
No. I don't remember what song it was.
We're not going to dig too deep into it. I wanted to bring it up to embarrass her because I think it's funny that she broke her leg dancing. I know I have come very close to injuring myself dancing, but her first time dancing bachata. Yeah. Anyway, that's a wonderful story. Anyway, sorry. So you do so well at this, right? You do so well in understanding manga and selling manga and basically changing the entire industry through manga, that you decide to take on one of the most thankless jobs in comics, the job that kills people's souls and wrecks their physical health. It is the job that has no mercy. It is thankless, and people think it is uncreative. You are now an editor.
Wow. I am, yes.
Wow.
And I love it. It's amazing.
I will say that as I've kind of stepped through all the different phases and have done some editing myself, not a ton, but I can say that man, I did not realize, as a fan, as a salesperson, as a retailer, you name it, right? Until you are close to the metal, right? Until you're right there in it, you don't realize how much effect the editors have on the final say. I mean, it's not like an editor is pushing their. I'm going to expound here a little bit, but it's not like editors are pushing their own agendas on a book. It's that it's a conversation about what can make this book at its best at each stage, right? And it's in the conversation that things get better, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I assume, again, I don't know exactly what editor means for you. It could mean, you guys are dealing mostly with translations, right? Is that so what does that work entail? Can you talk about that in broad strokes? I don't want you getting in trouble at work or anything by saying anything that is going to get you in trouble, but if you can talk about that.
No, I'll definitely talk about it. So it is very different than kind of what you imagine as editorial, because I'm not working directly with the creators, hardly ever. But I am working directly with the translators and the letterers. And so in broad strokes, what happens is we get files from Japan, and they are in Japanese. And we work with the translator, and the translator gets us a script. And then I'll take the script and I'll do a pass on the script, and I will... Localization is a big part of it. So making sure that the book reads to an English-speaking audience. So if there's terms that might be confusing, making sure we either, subtitle them or expand on the term, use a different term, making sure the flow is there so it doesn't sound like a translation, making sure the characters have different character voices and it's not all, the translator's voice going through the whole thing. So that's the first pass of the script. One of my favorite parts is picking out the sound effects, because Japan has really, really specific terms they use for, like, the sound of rain, the sound of paper tearing, the sound of just the emotion of gloom. Like, all of these things have sounds. And so we get to pick what we want that to sound like, and of course we have some standard stuff that we use, and we can bounce it off on other editors. But that's one of my favorite parts at script stage. And
so
then,
what is the translation? What is the translation of the sound of gloom?
So I usually either do like a dun, like DUNN, or like a doom, depending on if it's a comedy or something else. Yeah. Okay. Yes. And then we take the script and then we send it to our letterer, and our letterer takes out all the Japanese and puts in the English lettering. So that is the stuff that's in the balloons that's easy to take out and put in, and it's also, they sometimes have to hand draw the sound effects into the background, and that's very cool to see that change happening. And then we get the lettered script back, we go through that, and it goes through a couple passes internally until we end up with the final product.
How many passes does it usually take?
So it depends. So I'm trying to decide how to describe this, because for me, it'll take about 3-4 passes, but then there's other people who look at it too. So we have copy desk who looks at it, and they do more of like the technical stuff, like grammar, punctuation, like making sure that things are in the right tense. And then a couple of my coworkers and supervisors will take a look at the book before it finally goes off to print as well.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everyone I know, and I've tried to asking this question a couple of different times, never on this show. So this is my first attempt here. Everyone I know who has to do notes on lettering, it's such a specific taste thing that I have found to be like there's not like a standard style guide, right? Generally speaking, for lettering, because it tends to change and tastes change and whatnot. But every editor I know has like a couple of things that they always look for. It could be a pending, like at the top of the panel. It could be not breaking up the dialogue into a number of different balloons. Do you have like this is I'm gonna die on this hill, and if you put this in there, you're gonna get a note. This always will get a note. Do you have one of those?
Well, there's some really obvious ones with what I'm doing, which are not that exciting because they're so obvious. But sometimes some of the Japanese text gets left behind, like in the background, or like it'll be like they'll erase the text but not refill in the background, so you'll just see a little white spot around the sound effect. I'm like, no, we're filling in this. Things like that. Like that is so like very specific to what I'm doing, but that's a big one for me if I see any kind of like mistakes in the background when relettering. There's because of the nature of what we're doing, again, it really has to match the Japanese text. So we want the phrasing to fit into the balloon that it was originally in. But that does mean that we have to be creative sometimes to reword it so that it's smaller enough to fit in the balloon. Things like that, because the balloons are often vertically aligned because that's how the Japanese language is written. And so we'll have to be creative with how we're writing things and how we're fitting them in the balloons. And we have to make sure, like one big thing too is making sure the text doesn't touch the side of the balloon, which happens a lot. So that's when I'm often marking too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know, I buy it. That all sounds, it sounds like an incredibly interesting challenge, right? Is in making that literal translation happen from one to another. Yeah. That's really interesting.
It's very cool. It's like a little puzzle. There are certain like jokes that don't translate properly. Like there was one I was working on, and it was something along the lines of I'm gonna get this wrong, so don't take me at my word for this. But they were talking about the moon, and there was a Japanese word that also meant plunger that they were using, and so there's like just a drawing of the moon stuck in a plunger. And I was like, what? What is happening here? And I had to like talk to my translator and be like, what does this drawing of a moon stuck in a plunger mean? And she's like, oh, it's like a homonym between these two words, so they could mean plunger, they could mean moon, they could mean something. And so there's like little jokes like that are wordplay that we have to like really think about how to make the wordplay work. Sometimes we can do something funky and fun on our end, and then sometimes if we really want to save that joke, we'll just do a subtitle being like, this means this in Japanese. So yeah.
Is this your favorite job you've had so far in comics?
Yeah,
really,
definitely.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad you landed there. As we were talking, I realized we've gone down the winding path you've taken, and we missed something that I think is really, I want to bring back just for a moment. Which I don't remember what you guys called yourselves, but I recently saw Victoria McNally at at here in Brooklyn. It was at a 9:00 showing, the 35mm Buckaroo Banzai, and it was awesome. Amazing. It was incredible. I was there by myself because I couldn't get anybody to take my second ticket. It's a little, I know, very sad. Someone should have come and enjoyed this with me. I had somebody who was coming and they had to cancel. Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm not here for the tears. But I was sitting. I realized after the lights came up, right in front of me was this group of like eight people, and in the middle of them was Victoria.
Wow, I love Victoria.
I know, and it reminded me of. There was this, you guys had, it was you and Victoria and Shanice and like, I want to say 2 or 3 other people. They were all, you were all of the same general age and gender. And they, you guys had such a warm connection that I was always a little bit, I don't know, not jealous of, but I was like, oh, it's so nice that they have that, you know? So
yeah.
Anyway, then you guys call yourself like the Sailor Moons or something like that. Did I get that
We're
wrong?
the Sailor Scouts.
The Sailor Scouts. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
It was really nice. I love that group. And then actually, after that group kind of went in some different directions, the group of us who were around the same age who were left at Valiant, during the whole pandemic, we played games online because we had dispersed as well. But we stayed in touch and played games online, and we played like Among Us and Jackbox and stuff throughout the whole pandemic, and it was amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
it was
incredible.
really, really trauma bonded friendships that we made.
I just went through all of the pandemic, just checking all of the very typical boxes. I learned to make sourdough. I cooked a lot. It was. Yeah, there are times I kind of miss it. I'm not gonna lie. Yes, it was nice being forced.
I don't talk to any of them nearly as much as I did then, and that was lovely.
Yeah. It was not nearly as bad as we look back on it. We're gonna tell our kids it was much worse than it was. We're gonna say, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what we had to go through. There was no toilet paper." Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've gotten really far in. Is there anything that I've missed? Like, is there like what pieces are you like? I wish you would have brought that up, or thank God he didn't ask me that, and I'm gonna tell him now. Yeah.
I did kind of want to talk a little bit about how I ended up in editorial, just because it was something I wanted for so long, and it was a tough process, honestly, to switch from sales to editorial. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit.
Please do.
So.
And that
when
is,
I started,
just to give us some perspective, my perspective on that is a really incredibly difficult step to make, because, when you're in like a place like Valiant, your best way to succeed is to show that you can stay in your lane, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to do too much of, hey, you guys should do this, right? So you want to just say, yeah, you give me this, I'm going to sell it, right? You kind of want to do that. And as you grow, you want to be able to say, well, I think, if you guys could tweak this, but that takes years of experience to get people to actually even listen to you. So it's an incredible leap that you made.
Yeah, and if there are people who are listening who are, thinking about the industry, thinking about changes in the industry, I just want to talk about my experience, because I can't believe I finally actually made it to where I am. I always wanted to do editorial from the time I first started looking into comics. And I was writing blogs, I was doing stuff in that realm to try to get some experience. I did a few freelance editing projects for some creators I knew. But when Matthew mentioned the job in sales, I just thought, well, this is a job at an actual publisher, how can I turn this down? On the one hand, I know it will be harder to switch departments once I've chosen a lane. But on the other hand, I'll have insider knowledge of the industry. And so I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm going to take the sales job. I have the retail experience, see where this goes, learn more about the industry. So I actually applied for editorial at Valiant. I don't know if you knew about that, but I did apply. And one of the editors who was working there at the time, Carl, he kind of took me under his wing and would give me like little editorial tests.
Ballers?
And he
Carl
also...
Ballers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've worked with Carl since, so this must have been after I left, because I don't think... No. Carl came in just as I was leaving. But then I worked with Carl at Bad Idea, so yeah.
Yes,
okay.
yeah. He was great. I had a fairly sheltered childhood, so he also was helping me with my pop culture knowledge. So he would give me lists of movies to watch to expand my knowledge, because he was like, this is important for being a good editor, is you have to have the references and these cultural touch points. So he would give me like The Godfather, Aliens, like stuff like that to watch. And that was amazing. I didn't get the job at Valiant, but I still was doing, some freelance stuff, still had it in my mind. And then I was enjoying the event stuff so much. And when I went to Viz, I was enjoying the sales side of it so much. I really liked what I was doing. And then we had an opening in editorial, and I was like, well, this was always my dream. I'm happy where I am now, but I'll be upset if I don't at least try. So I'm going to try to give this dream another shot. And then through the interview process and the application process, I was like, wow, no, this is really still my dream. Like, I had kind of shelved it for my own sanity, but I was like, no, this is what I want to do. And I actually did not get the job the first round of hiring. I was told that they really, really liked me, but they decided to go with people who had more experience, which is very fair because I did not have as much experience. But then when another round came around, I got hired in that round. So the message of it is, don't give up. I failed at becoming an editor so many times, and now I am one, and I'm so happy. And it's worth the disappointment and the drive and the doing stuff outside of work in your free time to try to get there and have that experience.
It's funny. The traditional path towards editorial is really just taking. I mean, when I say it's the worst job in comics, I'm not lying. It really is. I mean, you had to do 1,000, cold calls to retailers, but you weren't doing like the kind of grunt work that assistant editors are doing. Like they're like junior assistant editors are the kind of the labor force, as it were, in a typical publishing house. So I get it, man. But you got there eventually. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all in though, you've done it now. You've done it now for about a decade. Yeah. You've been at this.
Oh, gosh.
What do you when you look back on that? Yeah, somebody you meet young Julia coming out of University of Minnesota, right? And she comes to you and is like, I want to work in publishing. Do you scare her off? Do you tell her, like, go get a real job, kid? Do you?
No way. I still could not picture what else I would be doing with that communications degree. Like, there's nothing in my world that I could think would give me the satisfaction that publishing has given to me, because I was a kid who, I got through depression by reading. I got through anxiety by reading. It built who I am as a person for my entire life. So getting to be part of providing that for other people, it just means so much to me, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Aw, that's wonderful. I'm so glad. Hey, so tell me, this is something I've been asking people on this show for a minute, and I think you have a unique perspective, I think, from which to work. What gives you hope, right? Sometimes comics can be hopeless, right? We go through peaks and valleys in sales, and like I said, some of these jobs can be really thankless, right? They can be really difficult, and during those times, you need something that gives you hope. What gives you hope for comics as an industry, as a place to have a career, as a place for young people to like come in and kind of make their mark? What is it about this that keeps you going?
There's kind of two things that really give me hope and help me out. One of them is just the quality stories and the moving stories. And, I had a volume come out today that I worked on. It's the 12th volume of the series. And, I got a little teary-eyed just seeing the announcement that it was a final volume, because I love it so much, and it was such a heartwarming slice of life about, two high schoolers who find love, and one's really shy and one's outgoing, and it's so sweet. And just, having those opportunities for people to see themselves in the comics, it gives me so much hope, because it helps people not feel alone, and there's stories out there to relate to. And that kind of ties into my second point, which the second thing that gives me hope is, my friend who works in tech, has nothing to do with comics, is like, yo, my brother is so into Death Note. Can you get me, a book or some merch or something? And she's like, it's his favorite thing. He reads it all the time. And seeing, the youth, the young people getting so into these stories, connecting over it, expressing themselves because they have these stories, and, hearing from everybody. My dad has even read some manga now, which I never thought would happen. I can't believe I found the one that got him hooked. I can't believe it.
What was it?
It was this one, Saint Young Men. It's not a Viz book. But it's a book about Jesus and Buddha living in an apartment in Tokyo together. They take a year off from like being the symbols of their religion. And it's so funny, but it's also so respectful to both religions and like the actual, what do you call it? Religious bits in it are incredibly well done and well researched. And so my dad loved it. He was so into it, and it got him to read a backwards book, which he never thought he would do. And they have like translation notes about all the different religious notes and things like that.
Oh, I want to read that now. You sold me. You sold me.
It's
You're
so
still good.
good.
You still got it.
I do.
You can still convert even as old guys, you know,
Yeah.
into manga readers.
My dad will find a book like at the used bookstore or like at our local comic shop, and if it says Viz on it, he'll buy it for me. And it's the cutest thing. Yeah.
Oh, what a sweetie. All right. This has been wonderful. Seriously. I cannot tell you. This lived up to the hype. I was really looking forward to this interview, and it absolutely hit. So tell our audience where they can find you if you want to be found on the intertubes. If there's anything else, like any other message you want to make sure you get out, now is the time, because at some point I will stop recording. We could go on all night, but at some point I'll stop recording, and then we're going to go play Among Us. So so where can they find you, and if you have any other parting thoughts?
All right. So the only social media I really use anymore is Instagram, and I'm at J_Woodchuck, like the animal. It was a nickname because of Walchuk as a kid. So J_Woodchuck. And then parting thoughts. Just keep doing it. Keep reading. Keep celebrating the things that you love. Don't let the politics of the industry keep you from enjoying what you love and promoting what you love and finding the enjoyment. That there's so much enjoyment to be found in comics. So keep doing it and keep reading.
Amen. Amen, amen, amen.
Hi again. Thanks so much for watching Comic Industry Insiders. It, as always, is our pleasure to talk to the movers and shakers of comics and to bring you those conversations. We'd love it if you'd support us with a like and subscribe, and telling your friends is always good, but really what we'd want to do is hear from you. Any questions, any suggestions you have about our show, any suggested guests, frankly, anything at all, we'd love to hear from you. Our producer is nearly always Stephanie Gerk, and our researcher is Anthony Militano, who makes me look much smarter than I am. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Namaste, y'all.